Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. As we enter our second year of the global COVID-19 pandemic, with record numbers of both cases and deaths, our schools, businesses, and governments are still struggling to deal with the health, economic, mental, and societal impacts of the latest Omicron variant. This all adds to the ongoing uncertainty of our ever-changing indoor and outdoor, vaccinated and unvaccinated protocols, and the politics of the pandemic that will drive how we all come back together as a unified or fractured community. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
You know, being homeless, it is very hard and it's a long road and the lack of supports out there. And then a meeting with the project, it gave me my life back, really, and my self-esteem personally, because, it is hard when you're living in a society that has no compassion for anybody that's in the homeless or in the low-income stage, right?
One of the topics we have focused on through our special COVID-19 series are organizations and governments that are experimenting with providing cash transfers to unhoused community members. We're finishing up our special series on COVID-19's impact on our nonprofits, small businesses, and local governments with this very informative and insightful interview with Foundations for Social Change. Foundations for Social Change were the first organization in North America to develop a research project to study the impact on the lives of our unhoused neighbors through providing cash transfers to unhoused community members. In this episode, we feature the voices of the Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in the Department of Psychology Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia, Dr. Jiaying Zhao, along with the Director of the New Leaf Project, Heather Hay, and the LEAP Co-Chair and Peer Coordinator, Ray Bonnaroo. I'm joined remotely by Dr. Jiaying Zhao, an Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in the Department of Psychology Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia, along with the Director of the New Leaf Project, Heather Hay, and the LEAP Co-Chair and Peer Coordinator, Ray Bonnaroo. Welcome to Voices of the Community, Dr. Zhao, Ray, and Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
And I will call you Dr. JZ or just JZ. So staying with you, JZ, could you provide the audience some context and kind of background about the actual study that you put together on providing cash transfers directly to unhoused community members there in British Columbia?
Sure. Foundations for Social Change started the New Leaf Project back in 2016. It was co-founded by Claire Williams and Franz Chalangi. I joined the combo as the research lead for the pilot. So this project was motivated by an innovation, which is to reduce homelessness with cash transfers. The reason being, the existing approaches to homelessness include providing emergency services like shelters, providing healthcare services like detox treatment programs, or providing supportive housing. None of the existing approaches addresses the core cause of homelessness, which is lack of money. So this is where we came in. We want to provide people with a large lump sum cash transfer so that they can make decisions for themselves. They can decide how to spend the money so they can get out of homelessness and into stability. The whole project was founded upon this model, which is believe in someone. We will distribute the cash transfer. We believe in you to make the best choices for yourself. That's the idea. So in this pilot, we recruited 115 individuals experiencing homelessness in Vancouver, and we gave 50 of these individuals a one-time cash transfer of $7,500. And we tracked the impact of the cash transfer for 1 year. And the reason for the $7,500 was that was the annual income assistance in BC back in 2016 when we were designing the project. Now the income assistance was over $10,000 per person per year. That's where we'd like to go next. And what we found was really promising results from the pilot. So the cash recipients reduced their days in homelessness. So they reduced close to 3 months in homelessness. They were able to get into stable housing faster than people who did not get the cash transfer. They increased their savings, spending, particularly spending on rent, food, clothing, transit, and durable goods like furniture, cars, etc. Importantly, we did not see an increase in spending on alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. So this is in contrary to a lot of the assumptions we hold about people in homelessness, which is that if we give them cash, they're going to spend it on drugs and alcohol. That was the exact opposite of what we found. We saw that our cash recipients actually slightly reduced their spending on alcohol and drugs and cigarettes, and people who did not get the cash transfer actually slightly increased their spending on those items. And finally, I want to say that because of the cash transfer, people relied on social services less. They actually become more self-sufficient and independent. So as a result, this less reliance on social services led to a cost savings for government. And we calculated exactly how much that saves the government. So our cash transfer produced a net savings of over $700 per person per year. This is after accounting for the cash transfer itself. So what this shows is that cash transfers help people significantly. They help people get out of homelessness, and they help government save money at the end of the day.
Of the pool of members in the pilot, what would you say was the percentage of the participants that were actually able to stabilize their housing and move out of being, if you will, unhoused or living out in the open?
So at 1 month after the cash transfer, close to 50% of the cash recipients were able to get into stable housing. And over 1 month, that rose close to 80%. So over 1 year, over 80% got out of homelessness. Whereas people who did not get the cash transfer were still able to get out of homelessness, but at a much slower rate.
So the report, which, as you and I were talking about before we came on, is still being peer reviewed, it sounds like?
Under review, yes, but there's a publicly available preprint online. So I sent you the link, George, in the chat. So everybody can view the paper, and we're happy to talk to anybody who's willing to discuss more or even collaborate.
And this study then led to another study. And do you want to share with the audience a little bit about the outcomes that came from the first study that led to the second study? And then we'll turn to Heather to talk about the actual New Leaf project itself. What are all the components of it?
So the pilot study had a small number of people. So as I said before, it only had 115 people in it. It was a small sample size, which means that a lot of the outcomes were not significant because we didn't have the statistical power to detect a difference in a lot of outcomes we tracked. So outcomes like income, education, employment, food security, cognitive function, well-being, etc. There was a positive trend in all those outcomes, but we weren't able to detect a statistical significance. So that motivated the expansion project where we quadrupled our sample size. So now we will have 400 people in the expansion project. So that will give us enough statistical power to detect a difference between the cash and control groups. So that was the kind of the scientific reason for the expansion project. But also, another reason is there were a lot of inefficiencies in the pilot project. So the pilot project was done, we were the first in the world to do the study. We ran into a lot of problems. Our recruitment strategy was not the most efficient one. There was a lot of kind of hiccups along the way. And so the expansion project actually was an improvement, a significant improvement upon the pilot project, where we streamlined a lot of the recruitment processes. And we also had a whole program to collect qualitative data in addition to the quantitative data we have. So I think this is like the much improved version from pilot. I'll hand it over to Heather to explain more of what we're doing in that expansion project.
And this is the creation of the New Leaf Project. So Heather, can you provide us a whole kind of context and background of what is the New Leaf Project?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, George. And thanks, Jay-Z. It was a great background. So the pilot project, George, was also called the New Leaf Project. So this project that we're currently doing now is the New Leaf expansion project. So as Jay-Z said, in the original project, there was 50 cash transfers. In this project, we're looking at recruiting 400 people. 200 individuals will receive cash and 200 people will be in the controls. Our current state is we've recruited approximately 66 people in good completes in the last 6 months into the project. And just talking about efficiencies, it's taken us 6 months to recruit and to fully onboard these 66 participants. And that's the same number of people that they onboarded in the pilot project, but it took nearly 2 years for them to recruit that number in the pilot. So we do have efficiencies. And I think the efficiencies are threefold. One is partnership and connection with community organizations. So we have a memorandum of agreement with over 28 community organizations. They work as our referral partners to the population that we would like to receive into the project. And through those community organizations, we've identified a key role, which is community connectors who support the participants through the project over the course of the year. So they do the recruitment, the follow-up, and act more like a meaningful friend through the whole process. So they're not therapists, they're not doing treatment, they're basically working beside and connecting people and keeping people in the project as we move forward. I wanted to just share a little bit about who the population is, because I think sometimes we have these mental models about people who are living homeless, and that's oftentimes beefed up by the media. So our project is really focused on those individuals who do not have a complex mental health problem, who do not have or misuse drugs, and do not have a gambling addiction or need of gambling. And the reasons for that, number one, the project itself was extremely controversial when we first did it. And secondly, we have a very rigorous oversight, both with UBC ethics as well as with the data review board. And I think the population that we've chosen is really basically a population who we guesstimated would do no harm to self or to others on receipt of the cash transfer. So that's the population. And one of the interesting findings in the expansion project is this is a group that is really the hidden homeless, the population of working poor. So many of our population are working, have 2-3 jobs. And that was the same as true in the pilot project. And just one thing happens to them. So they either lose a job or their car breaks down or someone gets sick, and that just defaults them to the street. So when you think about this cash transfer, it really is an intervention more upstream as a preventative strategy to prevent people becoming entrenched in homelessness. And the population as well, the sample size that we have is truly representative of people living unhoused currently now in BC. So what we know is that over 1/3 of the homeless population is Indigenous. So we've reached out and partnered with many Indigenous community partners, the Métis Nation, Aboriginal Friendship Center, in order to secure a population that is representative of our current population here in BC who is living unhoused.
Heather, staying with you, besides just the actual cash transfer, are there other wraparound services that your community service partners are providing the participants in the program?
Yeah, good question, George. Thanks. I always forget about that. And it is more than just cash. And certainly our participants will tell us it's more than just cash as well. But we have other partnerships. So we have a partnership with TELUS, our large telephone and communications company. They provide free telephones and SIM cards for a year to the participants, both cash and non-cash. We also have a very strong partnership with Van City, who's our banking partner. And Van City provides us with all the financial support. So free savings accounts for all of the participants. And they have a key contact person across all of their branches because our project spreads across quite a large geographical area in Metro Vancouver. So we've been able to establish relationships in all of those outlying banks. And the beauty about that is oftentimes homeless people are really shame-based and have a lot of stigma, and it's difficult for them to walk into a bank, open up an account, and go through those processes. So having somebody at the bank that knows about the project and can really help people wayfind through that process has been invaluable to the success of the project. The other thing is Van City also supports us with fiscal literacy. So we are beginning to provide support for all the participants if they do select around fiscal literacy, and they can be provided coaching on a one-on-one or in a group setting. And then obviously the other wraparound services that we have, and I think the key service is the community connector, who actually stays with people over time, helps them to wayfind, helps them to find additional resources, and provide support in a meaningful way.
Heather, you've done this over the last years. How has COVID impacted the pilot program and now your phase 2?
JC, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so we were fortunate to wrap up the pilot project just as the pandemic started. So that didn't really influence our pilot. And we launched the expansion in May this year when the restrictions are being lifted and when people are being able to move around. So we were fortunate to just miss the lockdowns while we were planning the expansion. But I have to say that over the summer, we did experience, people getting sick from various illnesses, including COVID, but that just happens to everyone. But yeah, Heather?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that during COVID, we had some good financial support from our federal government, provincial governments through CERB, which was financial assistance. And now that CERB has completed and finished and that support is not available to individuals, I think it leaves a glaring gap in the supports to our families who are the working poor. And I think during COVID, they somewhat didn't have to worry about a paycheck coming in because CERB was there and CERB kind of balanced that out. But I think it's back now to a situation where we don't have universal basic income. And so people are still struggling about how to make ends meet, particularly here in Vancouver. Some of the trends that we're seeing from the expansion project are because of a huge increase in rents. Our rent increased over 46% this year in BC. So people are just been unable to meet their rent agreements. And we're seeing way more evictions, a trend of more single moms and families. I think in the pilot, we didn't see as many children that we're currently seeing now with the potential to default to the street. We've been partnering with rent banks here as well in BC for the project. And the rent banks have just been swamped in the past 6 months with the number of evictions and supports and the increased workload to manage people who are getting evicted from their homes. Cost of living just hasn't kept pace with the increase in housing here, for sure. We're seeing trends as well of elderly. So people who are 65 and over. Our project is just supporting individuals who are 18 to 65, but certainly a trend has been over the past number of months, we're getting calls throughout the neighborhoods saying that there's more and more seniors that are living in their cars, that are unhoused, that are living with friends, that have become destabilized. And I think partly it's because being on a fixed income and with the cost of housing going up, they're defaulting to the street. So I think those are the major areas where we're seeing new trends in the expansion project than we had from the pilot, but recognizing again that the pilot was a very small sample size.
You're listening to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. Voices of the Community is supported by a grant from the James Irvine Foundation, dedicated to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. More at irvine.org. This is George Coster, your host, and if you're just joining us, today's episode is focused on the Foundation for Social Change's study on the impact on unhoused neighbors through providing cash transfers directly to homeless community members. Let's get back to our conversation about the findings and recommendations from the study with the Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in the Department of Psychology Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia, Dr. Jiaying Zhao, along with the Director of the New Leaf Project, Heather Hay, and the LEAP Co-Chair and Peer Coordinator, Ray Bonnaroo. So turning back to you, JC, and this is also for you, Heather, as well. So the outcomes from the pilot and now going into the second phase of it, have you utilized this information to share with the City of Vancouver plus the regional government? Has it helped impact any change of policy? I guess my question would be how the outcome from the studies have impacted or not impacted local government policy.
We have communicated our findings of the pilot to the city, state, even federal governments in Canada and US and UK. But there hasn't been meaningful policy change at this point for many reasons. One is I don't think we can change policies based on a small study of 100 people. That's precisely why we're doing the expansion project. Two is there's still a lot of public resistance to the idea of giving people in homelessness cash because the public don't trust people in poverty or people in homelessness. I think that has to be corrected and addressed. In the preprint that I shared with you, we actually did 2 more large-scale experiments to demonstrate this deep public mistrust toward people in homelessness and the way to kind of mitigate or address this bias. So I think to make policy change happen, we need several critical ingredients. One is more evidence, more robust evidence with a larger sample. 2 is frame the impact of the cash transfer as reducing costs. I think that's something like to showcase the cost effectiveness of this program and to erase that public concern of misuse of cash. So we need to highlight the fact that people are able to use money wisely and to better their lives. And there was actually a reduction in spending on drugs and alcohol and cigarettes. So I think these critical ingredients are necessary, but obviously we're not politicians, so we can't guarantee policy change.
Yeah, I can add to that, George, as well, because Foundations for Social Change, that's our key mission, is to collect the scientific evidence and then move the evidence into policy. So some of our learnings basically, and I've been meeting with a number of politicians just in the course of this last week, is that although our project illuminates a huge need in society, there seems to be a lot of fragility of our current government supports and really huge lapse in political will. So certainly that is at the federal level, and there's an entrenchment around wanting to change the system. At the provincial level, I think what we're hearing back is there may be some wiggle room, but we have a huge, visible, complex homeless problem on the streets here in BC. And I think the politicians' thinking are centered around we have to make some inroads there and actually gain some public confidence before we can turn our attention to those that may be invisible currently right now. And then secondly, I think just to amplify what Jay-Z was saying, I think they're looking for lots more evidence. Like even with the 400 participant sample size and the amount of money that we're giving out, it's minuscule, I think, in their eyes to really be able to shift the current processes. And currently, what we would like to see out of policy change is we'd like to see no strings attached to a lot of the supports that government is providing. This belief that people know what's best for them and they can spend the dollars in order to be in the best interest of themselves and their families. And thirdly is the way that it's distributed. So what we've heard back to many of the participants, it's extremely expensive to move out of housing. First month's, last month's rent, reinstituting power, all of those things. And the current way that support is given, it dribbles in. So you're always kept in a survival mode. So one of the things I think that we're experiencing in the expansion project is we're trying to disrupt that intergenerational cycle of poverty so that people can be sustainable over time. And I know, and Ray can reinforce that, he's a very good example of how receiving the cash has created a new life trajectory for himself. And I think for many of our participants, the infusion of cash has been a one-time only thing to get them back on their feet, get them back in their jobs, get them contributing. Also, one of our major learnings is that repeatedly, our participants frequently reject the label of experiencing homelessness. Although they are outwardly homeless, they reject the label of experiencing homelessness. And I believe that's because the stigma that's associated with being impoverished and being unhoused. So it's extremely complex when we start to move forward to policy change. And there's a lot of entrenchment at all levels of government.
And Heather, staying with you, have you seen any reaction in the States? I know you've worked with some of the nonprofits like our friend Kevin Adler at Miracle Messages, who was our December show on his Miracle Money program. So, and then you had Michael Tubbs, who was the mayor of Stockton, which we featured in our documentary, who did the first one here. So have you seen any movement here stateside, if you will, on the data? Because this is really, I mean, this is factual information that actually does have an impact.
Yeah, so I can't talk to the data. So Jay-Z can probably talk more about the relationships across cash transfers projects, because there's many now in the States and worldwide. So, and we were, I guess, the initial cash transfer project that actually helped for the replication to happen with Miracle Messages. And they're a strong partner of ours, even in the expansion project. So they're providing Miracle Friends. And so we have linked with them over time. And I belong to that network, that kind of cash transfer network in the States. I think there's more community mobilization than we've seen in Canada. I see that there's more interest across different states, Denver, New York City, throughout the states in order to be able to provide the cash transfers. Our project and our process has been very contained to BC alone. We attempted to actually do some expansion into the Toronto area and we couldn't get any traction. And I think even the conversation, so having the podcast that we're on today and the communication, lots more community mobilization, connectedness, I think, in the States, and it's starting to gain some momentum. I don't see the same thing happening here in Canada. Jay-Z, do you have any thoughts around data sharing or what your thoughts are? Because Jay-Z and myself actually, and UBC and FSC and others had put in for a large transformational grant, which was a multi-city kind of cash transfer project across Canada. And we were unsuccessful in securing funding for that. And Jay-Z can talk to that better than myself, but Jay-Z?
Yeah. So a key distinction between our program and a lot of programs that are happening in the US and UK is that we provide a one-time large lump sum transfer, whereas a lot of the other programs, monthly, smaller payments, around $500 usually. There are pros and cons of each approach. The monthly payments mimic the welfare checks. They provide security, but each payment is small, whereas our payment is large, but it's one time. The other distinction is, I think, our populations are people experiencing homelessness, whereas theirs is people who are low-income families. They're usually housed, whereas ours are not housed. So I don't think we can easily compare the results. But what we can do is, as Heather said, scale this project to different cities in Canada, keeping the same design, and then we can compare results. But I don't think we can compare apples and oranges at this point.
Thank you, Jay-Z. All right. So, Ray, turning to you, were a participant in the initial pilot program. Can you share with the audience a little bit about your experience in participating in the program and how that's helped you? And then I'd love to have you share about the leap in your co-chair, your work now with the organization itself.
It all started back in 2017. I was dealing with EI, or government funding for when we go unemployed. And I tried to get schooling, and apparently that wasn't part of their program, which they ended up shutting my EI down. And then I became homeless, and I lived in a shelter in about a year and a half. And that's when I was introduced with the New Leaf Project. And I got involved with them. They approached me and asked me if I wanted to do a survey, and which I did. And I thought, well, I got $20. I thought that was great and didn't realize that it was going to progress into a larger project. So I got involved with that. And I guess I was one of the first people that got the cash transfer. And it was quite the shock. Like, I mean, seriously, like, who does this? Nobody in my world would ever dream of getting this gun, and I thought, well, this is too good to be true, right? And then when the actual money was deposited in my account, I still didn't trust it, right? Because it was like, this is unreal. And so it took me about a week to finally take $100 out of the account and spend it, just to see if there was any repercussions, right? And there wasn't. So I was like, okay, it became like, this is my money. This is what I got to do. And then that's where I started making goal settings, right? Because I had a goal anyways. I wanted education. I wanted to be part of the frontline work with the homeless and people of addictions and stuff like that. Because I mean, I've been involved with it. In my past life, I was also living on the streets with my own personal addictions, and I overcame them. And now I wanted to participate on giving back and helping where I can, right? And so that's where I got involved with. I finally got my schooling, and so I became a community support worker. And as I progressed with the New Leaf, I mean, I put out a lot of time for the project, right? And then eventually I was hired, and it's been going great ever since.
And Ray, can you share what the LEAP, so it's LEAP, and between you and Heather, you can explain what that acronym means, and you're the co-chair and a peer coordinator. So what is that LEAP program, and then what do you do as a peer coordinator?
Well, I'm involved. We have a project that's called the Ambassador Project, right? And it's when participants fulfill the year project, and then they have the choice of joining the Ambassador Project. And what we do is we try to find things that help support the homeless, getting various things like, for instance, a survival guide. We want to create something like that, where there's information where people can go and get help that they need on the streets. And I mean, we're in the midst of creating a lot of new projects right now. I mean, it just started, so we haven't really have a lot of members yet. But as we progress, we plan to make a role for these ambassadors and to help. Right. So, and that's what I coordinate is finding various projects that we could use to help the homeless.
Yeah, so I can add to that. Thanks, Ray. And I can add to that, George. So LEAP, LEAP, was the lived experience panel, and Ray was co-chairing that. And that was from the pilot project. And one of the reasons why we established LEAP, because we have a principle of nothing about us without us. So it was really important for us to include the voices of the participants as we were planning for the Vancouver expansion project and learning from them. One of the big learnings I think that Ray brought to the table and others on the LEAP panel was exactly what he said, is what an emotional time it is for people when they receive the cash. And being research and so being from an arm's length community organization, I think many of the participants aren't really trusting. It's like, what the hell is going on here, right? And the ambassadors and the LEAP panel members said, we can help with that, Heather. So when people receive their cash, we can help be that bridge and let them know, no, this is for real, and provide that street cred that we need in order to soften and make individual participants available to the notion that deserving enough to have this cash, no strings attached. So that's been very helpful. And as Ray said, in consultation with LEAP members, we've decided to change the name and actually fold LEAP into the ambassador program. And we have funding for an expansion of a much larger ambassador program. I think Ray's a little humble, but one of the things that they were also looking at doing was a podcast and the development of a newsletter called The Shuffle. That's Ray's brand, which basically talks about how instead of actually coming with interventions that make a difference in people's lives, government and cities shuffle people around from one place to the other. And so therefore we have The Shuffle. And I think you'll see The Shuffle in the podcast as we expand the ambassadors program and really start to provide voice to our participants so that they can join with us and help us to, at a ground level, to make the changes that need to happen.
Thank you. And staying with you, Heather, and this is a question for each of you. What do you feel has been the biggest impact of both, I'm going to say the program, and then I'm going to ask Jay-Z of the study, but what do you feel has been the biggest impact on community members there in BC?
So there's three things I think from my perspective. Number one is most of the community organizations that we're working with say, Heather, if it hasn't been for this project, we would never have known about these individuals who need support. So that's been illuminating to the community organizations. And not only have they been able to work with us as we provide the cash and other supports, but then they've been able to link people to food programs and to recreational programs for the kids. But I think our population is really a population that is very silent. And so that's been a learning for the community organizations and ourselves. Secondly, I think there's been a huge impact on the individuals alone. Like some of the stories, and we've been working directly with participants, the impact on their lives and what they've been able to do and move on with their lives is really actually quite gut-wrenching. And I think it's so simple, like, why aren't we doing this, right? And I think the third impact has been, even for the most seasoned community connectors, I think there's been a huge elevation in compassion to the significant situations that a huge number of the members of our society and population are living in. And I think that's been overwhelming for many of the connectors as well.
Thank you. Ray, turning to you, you've both been a participant, so it's had impact on you on a personal level, but what do you feel? Could you share about both?
You know, being homeless, I mean, it is very hard and it's a long road and the lack of supports out there. And then a meeting with the project, it gave me my life back, really, and my self-esteem personally, because I mean, it is hard when you're living in a society that has no compassion for anybody that's in the homeless or in the low income stage, right? And then being able to having choices again and able to have a direction in life and getting my life back. I mean, that was awesome. I mean, there's nothing like it, right? And my hat's off to this project. I'm always grateful and I will always be grateful for what they did for me. And then having that chance of getting stable again, which I did. I mean, I ended up getting my schooling and a job and a beautiful place now, right? And everything is going up now. So, I mean, to me, this is the best project I've ever met in my life, right?
Thank you, Ray. I'm going to turn to our final question, which is, what do you feel are some of the good things that have come out of the pandemic, if you will, to support your work, your program, unhoused community members in BC, and in a sense, the magnification of that even stateside? Jay-Z, would you like to start?
I mean, the good thing about the pandemic is that over 100 countries in the world have used cash transfers to help its citizens. That really demonstrates the need for cash or the power of cash. But we need to do it more. I mean, we can't just use it once and say that's only a pandemic specific thing. It has to be a piece of the social protection in Canada and in other countries as well.
Thank you. Heather, Ray, thoughts?
Well, during the pandemic, I mean, homelessness doesn't stop. And I mean, and I was always out there, regardless was with the orders and stuff like that. I mean, I did a lot of the outfield work, collecting stories and stuff like that, meeting all kinds of people that on the streets, and it was amazing, right? And I mean, and then having that chance to getting somebody back onto their feet again, just to see their faces and the gratefulness that we were there for them. I mean, there's nothing like it. I mean, to me, it heals me every day being able to be out there and helping the people that are in need.
Thank you.
Yeah, from my perspective, I don't see the relationship between any of the outcomes of the pandemic and the further support for our program. Like, I think even as we speak today, our governments are starting to roll back CERB. There's 850,000 people across Canada who received benefits during the pandemic and now are facing a rollback of those dollars that were provided to them. So I think if we're thinking in our head that the pandemic was a gateway to be able to assist with universal basic income or additional cash transfers, or I don't see that happening. I don't think that it has improved any kind of government softness that people are deserving of increased benefits or the way that they're transferred.
Thank you. Great insights. So I guess the last question I would kind of ask was, what would you like to see come out of? So out of the tests, out of all of your work, out of the data and the reports, or what would you like to see happen? Jay-Z, you want to start?
Well, as a researcher, I'm supposed to remain neutral to the outcome of the study. But of course, I want the expansion project to succeed, have an impact on our participants as well as policy. That's what I would like to see, but we'll see what actually happens.
Ray, what would you like to see?
Many more success stories. I'm out there and I love just doing what I'm doing. And the more we can get people off the streets, the better. And being part of this team is just amazing to be able to do that for them.
Thank you. And Heather?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what I'd like to see is opportunity to expand the expansion. And so to be really able to scale and to see the New Leaf expansion project in other major cities, collect more data, be able to collect data on thousands of people in order to be able to shift the dial on policy. So I'm hoping it feels like this is a marathon, not a sprint. And we're really in for the long haul. And so I would just like to see the replication and the scaling of the New Leaf project across Canada.
Thank you, Jay-Z, Ray, and Heather, for sharing your wonderful work and the creation and execution of the New Leaf project, as well as all your research and data on the success of providing direct cash transfers to unhoused community members. We'll make sure that listeners have information on your website, and the first phase of that research, I'll make sure we have a link of that on the direct giving model, along with links to donate to your latest New Leaf program. Please stay safe and healthy as we all work our way through this latest stage of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of its variants. That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voices of the Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in the Department of Psychology Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia, Dr. Jiaying Zhao, along with the Director of the New Leaf Project, Heather Hay, and the LEAP Co-Chair and Peer Coordinator, Ray Bonnaroo. To review the first study and to find out more and support the work of Foundations for Social Change, please go to forsocialchange.org. You can find out more about the work of nonprofits working with our unhoused neighbors featured over the last 3 years in this series by going to our website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community, and then click on our COVID in San Francisco nonprofit series. And to find out more information about the first program to provide cash transfers to community members in the United States, the City of Stockton, please go to our website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community link, and then click on the Stockton's Rise from Bankruptcy link, and go to episode 12. We're transitioning this special series on nonprofits, small businesses, and local governments into a new 6-part series focused on our arts and culture organizations along with their workforce. The new series will be highlighting the issues and solutions our arts and culture organizations and their workforce are struggling with to come back from the pandemic, along with addressing the systemic racism in our performing arts ecosystem. The new series will include live in-person community dialogue events that will be streamed, as well as our usual radio show, podcast, and a television show with our friends at Bay Area Video Coalition. Go to georgecoster.com and sign up for our newsletter to participate in the live shows and stay in the loop on our new series. Thank you all for your support during the run of this very important series spotlighting the work of our nonprofits, small businesses, and our local government during this global pandemic. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. Today's episode was made possible by the audio wizard and our associate producer, Eric Estrada, and the graphics magic of Casey Nance from Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is supported by a grant from the James Irvine Foundation, dedicated to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. More at irvine.org. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.